Today we have a special guest, Emily June Wilcox. She is a wealth and business coach, author, and speaker on a mission to help women entrepreneurs heal their money wounds, make more profit in business, and build passive income so they can experience true financial freedom and time freedom. While building 3, 6, and 7-figure businesses in e-com, agency, and coaching, Emily decided to ditch the belief that it had to be hard. She tapped into feminine energy to allow more ease and joy and support from her team. She uses energetics and strategy to help women build their fempires and walk the joyous path to millions. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. I have been geeking out on your content and your new book.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's such a missing piece, I feel like, or just such a beautiful addition to the work that I do around money with clients is more on the practical, like setting up the systems to change your relationship with money.
Yeah.
When it comes to the actual wounds, we focus less on that. It's more just like acknowledging that story starts to shift. But your work has been so fascinating to me, the way that you've been able to distill down this topic of these money wounds into these like 6 basic wounds. I love it so much.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. It's like a dream come true to think about people who are in financial services or do their own money work with clients, being able to augment with this, because I just see it from such a different perspective. And I think you're very tapped into the spirituality and energetics and that kind of stuff. But I think many financial service providers just get so frustrated when their clients aren't doing the thing that they've all mutually agreed was going to happen. I'm like, because you're not addressing the
Something's
feeling.
in the way.
Yeah. And of course, they're agreeing to this plan because consciously they want to do this thing. But the subconscious, which is taking over and has a different plan that's oriented around avoidance of abandonment or avoidance of having an issue where they then don't trust themselves, etc. And so it's like when we can understand that, I think it makes everything work so much better. Like you get to understand yourself, or if you're a provider, you get to understand your clients and just have more empathy and understanding for the whole situation, and then more tools to actually help them move things in the direction of their goals.
Yeah, and to your point, this work is so needed, like for anyone else that supports people in the realm of money,
Yeah.
because like myself, I'm not trying to dive deep into that process and that part of the process with them. So having this simplified roadmap of being
Yeah.
able to identify which of them they are struggling with or which is unconsciously sabotaging them or getting in the way, and then also having this like clear roadmap of what it's going to look like to rewire that, kind of what the before and after of doing that healing work is,
Yeah.
through you having witnessed that take place with so many of your clients. It's that simplified roadmap, thanks to your work, that makes it possible to easily address and acknowledge that as part of whatever process somebody's going through with their money story. So I think this is going to plug in, I know, so well with my work and like anybody that helps people with money, like you said.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much.
It's so good. And it is such a pleasure to be able to look at your astrology chart relative to this work that you do, the way that you help people with this. Also, knowing your story as much as I do of what got you here and the multiple businesses that you juggle. I'm so excited to connect this lens of your chart and your design with what got you to where you are now. So first, acknowledging your big 3, that you are a Gemini sun and a Pisces moon and a Scorpio rising. And looking at that broad stroke pass at your chart, already I'm seeing the beauty in that your Gemini sun, that cohesive narrative focus of your work that is the storytelling. Like so much of this is being able to see what is that story of a lifetime that happens when somebody embraces that healing work and makes it to the other side.
Yeah.
And that it's basically creating this bridge, the way that you tell these stories of what the wounds are. That's the Scorpio piece. What's the shit that's in the way? Working through that to be able to illuminate the Pisces side of things. That's like the bigger purpose and the opening and the connecting with your mission in the world and like what your relationship with money is meant to be from an expansive and plugging into the whole human story side of it.
I love it.
Is the first thing that comes through. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never heard anyone describe Gemini energy as storytelling, but that's something that I've really been consciously focusing on this year and becoming a better storyteller, because what I've learned is that that's really the language of unconscious mind. It's very abstract, and in the experience, it's an imaginative, immersive process. And I believe that story really helps bridge that. And it's not just something that keeps it interesting for us. It's actually what helps unconscious mind to shift and align and get on board. And so it's been fun to take that to the next level. And you talking about Gemini storytelling is just very affirming with that.
Yeah, like you said, it literally creates the openings. It like makes the treasure map. It shows you the way out, and the way through is through story. And so the other thing with Gemini to point out with yours specifically too is you have a super loaded 7th house. So your Gemini sun is there with a whole bunch of other stuff that I want to circle around to. But so the 7th house is partnership or one-on-one. So it's that space that you're in when you're supporting a client through this. And the piece that I love especially about tuning into Gemini is that it's our blind spots. So when we bring in this dance with other people and being receptive to other people's stories and hearing them to get our own codes and clues out of those stories, everybody's story has a missing piece for us or something that would otherwise be a blind spot, but then we hear through their example and it gives us a key that we need for our own growth and healing. And I think that's part of the beauty of with astrology. It's of course you did this work. Of course, this is what you felt called to do, is bring everybody's stories together to create these keys and codes that become the missing piece to the blind spot that somebody might have to find that way through and out.
Yeah, it's so true. I notice anytime I feel like, I don't have anything to say. If I want to post something on social media and I'm like, I don't know, it's like I just need to get with one of my clients. I need to go into the spaces where my clients are asking questions or one of them books a call. And as soon as that happens, there's so much to say. There's so much energy to respond to. And it's true. I never see it as you're the one with the problem and I'm the one with the answer. And you brought this forward. It channels through me and we both benefit. And then there's the ripple effect of other people benefiting because, like you said, I'm collecting those clues and looking for patterns and then distilling that into teachings that can be shared more broadly.
So the 7th house is basically like the house of connection and mirrors. That's a great way to visualize what you're saying. It's we are a mirror of each other, but then there's this infinite hall of mirrors where then it bounces off of everybody and ripples and touches everybody that it needs to. So one way that I like to think about it with your sun and your moon in particular, which are the luminaries, is the code is what does it mean to do your sun? What does doing your sun look like for you? Because that's going to open up your code for like an infinite energy source, basically, better than caffeine. So you mentioned you're like, oh, when I'm feeling a little stagnated, I literally just need to get into the space with somebody else, which is the 7th house for you. And that activates your sun. And in particular, get into that space around sharing stories and listening and that back and forth of sharing minds and opening up our minds to each other to reflect off of each other. And then for you, that opens up that infinite energy source that is the activation of your sun, as well as just like the solar system in the sky, as above, so below. The sun is like that gravitational center that pulls all the other storylines together into one cohesive narrative of our purpose and what we're doing and our identity and how we're showing up. So it's the energy source and it's also feeling centered. So then all of a sudden you're in that space, you're having that conversation, you get turned on in terms of your energy and you're centered and know exactly what to say and share.
And feel more anchored in my identity. Oh yeah, this is who I am. This is what I do. The value I provide to the world.
100%. Okay. So I should bring in all these other pieces. So basically, you have this like you have these 4 pieces of your chart that are all hanging out right next to each other together. In astrology, we call that a stellium. It's like this fusion that happens between all of these parts of you. They operate as one. It's like this super part of you. So one we've talked about is it's part of where your energy comes from and you're feeling centered. So the other 2 that are in Gemini, in that same energy of one way to get down to the basics of what Gemini is, so that we're not just going off of like pop astrology and whatever we've heard, getting to the core of it.
The quizzes that we all looked at when we were growing up.
Right? That put us in boxes, which is not my way with astrology at all. I deliberately like to speak really broadly at first in my sessions, really almost ungrounded, energetically, not bringing in any specifics, because each of these 12 archetypes are taking the entire human experience, everything that ever was, is, and could be, and putting it into 12 boxes.
Right.
So like, who am I to say what this part of you is for you? Because you're the one that's lived it and fleshed it out with details. And so I like to start with that really broad stroke and then bring in the details of it. For you, you've got that sun in Gemini, so any of these archetypes, what we're looking at is the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, and 3 modes of movement, how they express, how they move and manifest. And the dynamic with that movement, I like to think of as either our relationship with the universe or the relationship between our inner and outer worlds. And so we have the 3 movements, which I don't love the language around these because they don't evoke much, but most people have heard of them. We have fixed, which is that element moving from out there into us. So it's the receptive quality of that element. We have cardinal, which is within us projecting out into the world. So it's this initiatory version of that element. And then we have mutable, which is this spiraled momentum dynamic between the 2 where they feed off of each other. With Gemini, we're looking at the air element, which is our stories, our mind, our ideas, our perceptions, and the magic that happens when we create this exchange with us and another person around that, right? Okay, so starting with basics. So we've got that your sun is there, what gives you energy and makes you feel centered and creates your sense of identity. And again, in the 7th house with other people, so just amplifying that. The other thing that is right there, just 1 degree from it, is your Chiron, which Chiron is the archetype of the wounded healer. Yeah. It's the process of going on your own healing journey and how that creates your capacity to be able to hold space for other people to go on theirs. That was the other thing that just jumped out in your chart. I'm like, of course your work is around people's wound stories, Gemini, Chiron, and stuff.
Yep, that tracks.
The other piece here that's right next to that is your North Node. And North Node is one of the coolest things to know about your chart. I could talk about this one all day, but the TLDR of it is that you have your South Node and your North Node. Your South Node opposite your North Node is like what's really comfortable and familiar for you. You could do it with your eyes closed. One way to think about it is it's your past life identity or path that you were on. Now, this life, you are invited to brave the other side and to start to retrain yourself, even though the South Node is your unconscious comfort zone. If you're not being deliberate, you'll just end up there. Your North Node, you really have to know about it to implement it. And it's a choice that you make to move in that direction. And every step that you take in that direction is wildly fulfilling. Like, it doesn't even make sense. It's completely irrational. And it just makes everything else flow better. So for you, your North Node in Gemini is there as well. And this brings a really interesting, so with Chiron, you have to go walk that path yourself before you are equipped to support other people with it. And I know that's a big part of your book and the story you tell. You're like, hey, I went there first, and this is how I help other people now. With the North Node, you're not that great at it yet. Like out the box, it feels awkward. It feels like something you really have to work at to be able to embrace. And it's not even about mastering it this life. Like we don't master our North Nodes, we just get closer and closer to them. And that's such a big piece of this for you. Your son was there shining a flashlight since you were born on the work that you need to do around this, the healing that you need to do to be able to fully embrace that direction of your destiny and being able to help other people. Can you share more about that dynamic? How every step that you take in the direction of doing this work yourself and being on this path of healing continues to open up what's possible in your support of your clients?
It definitely has always felt like me going first. And so much of it has felt very divinely guided. So when I was running the agency, I was the CEO. We still had our e-commerce business kind of in maintenance mode on the side, but the agency was what we were really focused on and growing. We had a team of people. We were trending towards our first 7-figure year. And if you had asked me, is this your life's purpose? I never felt like it was. I always felt like this is just what I'm meant to be doing right now. It feels correct, but it feels like business school. I'm just here learning these business lessons that I need to learn, and I'm enjoying the process of entrepreneurship. I never felt really connected to it from a soul mission perspective. If someone came and was like, hey, I want to buy your agency for the right price, I would have been like, yeah, fine, go for it. And essentially, the way that I started getting into this coaching work is it was the end of 2020. And so I was already setting intentions for the new year. And one of the intentions I set was I want to be very soul-led in this coming year. And so I had been meditating, and the mantra I had been using was speak and I will listen, lead and I will follow. And a friend and I and our families went to Sedona in between Christmas and New Year's, which is very like spiritual and healing place. And we booked to have these like shamanic massages. So we had someone come to our Airbnb. She did an awesome massage on me. And then she gets to the part where she's like channeling. And the stuff she's saying, it wasn't landing for me. I was like, oh no, should I have just booked the massage? Is this not the right thing? And as she's talking, then I hear a voice that I can tell isn't my own. And it says, you need to take a month off. And my first reaction was, no, I don't want to do that. I'm already taking 2 weeks off for Christmas and New Year's and whatever. And I'm traditionally have been someone who loves to just jump right back into things, that New Year's energy, let's go. So I didn't tell anyone, and I just sat with it for a couple days to see if, I think secretly hoping maybe that would go away. But it didn't. And so I told my husband, hey, here's the deal. I don't want to listen to this, but I also recognize that I've literally been sitting in meditation saying, speak and I will listen, lead and I will follow. And this is what I heard. And so I feel like I have to listen to it. And so we put a plan in place for me to step away and just check my email once a week. And here's who would be in charge and da-da-da. And long story short, I had thought that what wanted to come through during that 4 weeks was going to be something to really help the agency business. And at first, I was just feeling intuitively guided to cleaning out my kitchen cupboards and stuff that seemed to make no sense. But I'm like, okay, I'm listening to it. And there's all of this undoing because for years and years, I attached a lot of my self-worth to my productivity and to what I could do. And here I was not feeling like I was doing anything and not feeling like I was contributing. And my husband would come out of our home office and walk into the kitchen to fill up his water, and I could feel myself shrink and feel self-conscious that here I am in the house, not really doing anything. And so all of that was happening. And then I started to get little hints of things like, the org chart needs to be changed. It needs to be this. And, oh, this is the financial model we need to be working off of. Things here and there, but I wasn't feeling excited about going back, which was so interesting. And really all of this was preparing me to step away, not to come back in. And so as that became more clear, then we started working on right-sizing my role. And I was like, but what am I meant to be doing? And it felt like coaching was the correct thing. I'm like, okay, I'm willing to listen. What am I supposed to be coaching on? And I remember telling my best friend, I think it's supposed to be money. And her response was, duh. Yes, that feels so obvious. But it felt scary for me to even say that out loud to her, because although we had these two businesses that many people would have considered quite successful, I always felt like I was still chasing money, and that was still something that I was trying to crack the code on. But I was just willing to listen. And so when you're talking about this North Node journey and having to go first, like, it really did feel scary each step of the way. And it was like, okay, fine, I'll do this one thing. Fine, I'll take 4 weeks off of work. Fine, I'll start coaching and figure out what this even means. And I started a fresh Instagram account with 0 followers because I had built all my businesses without ever doing anything on social media. So I was totally unpracticed in showing up and speaking my truth. And the idea of trying to figure out what my truth was and say it with someone on the other side receiving it was too scary. So I'm like, you know what? How about this? How about I have 0 followers and I just show up and say what I want to say? And let's just get good enough at that and let it spread. And
That's
so
so good.
that's been it every step of the way. The podcast, I was like, if I'm going to ask people to talk about their money stuff, I got to talk about it first. So my first episode, I'm just going to lay it all out there. And it's turned into this book, a business, helping hundreds, thousands of people. But that would have seemed too big and scary initially. So it has always just been this one piece. And if I can figure it out for me, I trust that it will help other people too. And that's how the business was built.
So good. Everything that you were describing about that process of stopping doing and just being willing to listen and receive the guidance, and how that went against everything that you were used to in how you showed up for your business. I heard your Pisces moon woven through all of that. And when it comes to like doing your moon, that's the kind of feminine component to that solar drive and what gives you your energy. When you're doing your moon, when you're embodying that part of you by your design, it helps you to feel supported and held and nourished and nurtured on your path forward,
Yeah.
whatever that is. But it's such a big other part of what motivates us, because it's what gives you the motivation to go the long haul with it and stay the course. And there's the energy side, but there's the like, what can I fall back into feeling that? And for you with Pisces, it's so much listening to that guidance. But it occurs to me that because that center of your being is about that dynamic, that exchange, that giving and receiving and sharing on both sides, what I'm hearing is that part of the path you had to go on was, yes, opening up to that guidance, but ultimately creating a co-creative dynamic with spirit and your guides, so that you're getting a message, but then you have to be the one to go take the step one at a time that it gave you and act on it. And then you give that back. And then spirit's like, okay, here's the next instruction. And it's very much this, we're doing it together. Like stepping away from that, you're the driving force, but spirit's not really driving either. Like you guys have to find that equilibrium of doing it together for it to nourish you in that way and be your moon code.
Yeah. I love that. And it's still a work in progress. There are still times when I'll feel out of balance, or I'll recognize it later. That's cute. Like I was just trying to be fully in control again, because that on surface feels so much more comfortable to me. Oh, I get to be the one to make sure this outcome happens, and I'll just throw it all on my back and I'll make sure every piece of it is in my power. And then guess what? It's like, it doesn't work out that way. And the universe will come in with a reminder that we have to team up. And maybe I'll master that lesson and won't need the reminder at some point. But thus far, it's a fine tuning. Sometimes we really are in balance and then we get a little out of balance and have to dial it back in.
The moon has its phases, right? Like you're constantly cycling around whatever your relationship to this is in any given moment throughout the month or throughout these different phases. The other thing that really stood out to me about your story is like, of course it's money. Like when it came to this knowing and like you got this message and it was like, well, what's the angle? What's the direction? What's the focus? Your Jupiter is in your second house. So one of the sessions that I do, the Cosmic Cash Code session, we go really deeply into looking at this axis between your second and eighth houses. It's like your money axis. The second house has your codes of earning, and the eighth house, your codes of investing. In a reductive way, it's kind of like your money versus other people's money when it comes to facing those edges of either going into business with people or putting your money in places that are outside of your control to grow it, whatever it might be. So another way to look at it is the second house is where your money beliefs live, your more intimate and personal relationship with money, your ideas of abundance, self-worth, all these kinds of things. Eighth house is then when we meet our edges with that and we get triggered and tested and are almost catapulted into certain healing curves with it. So your second house is your house of money, the most reductive way to say it. Your relationship with money, your Jupiter's there. Wherever Jupiter is lucky. That's the simple way to say it. A deeper way to say it is that there's a lot of opening and expansiveness in that realm. That's the yes place for you, where when you show up, when you say yes, when you trust, when you take leaps and open, it works out for you. People on the outside see that as luck.
Right.
For you, you are lucky with money. And so, of course, when it came to how you're going to be able to support other people, you're like, well, this has always been a lot easier for me than other people. Why don't I help people with this?
I love that reframe because there were definitely a lot of times when it didn't feel easy. And I talked about this in the book, like some of that was unhealed money wound stuff where I felt like, oh, if it takes time and it's hard and I had to work hard for it and people see that I worked hard for it, then once I have the wealth, then they won't judge me. So that's how that was all playing into it. And now I'm in a place where it's like, great, I love that. I so embrace that. I'm lucky with money.
Let it be easy.
It's opening and expansive for me.
There's this other layer where it is in Capricorn. So part of what it means for you to say yes and lean in to open up that expansive path with money is a lot of doing the work, you know? So we're full of paradox. This is definitely a paradox of yours. It's like it's meant to be easy. You're meant to be lucky, but because you put in the work, just like you described it.
There you go.
The other thing that I want to point to, one of the biggies around your relationship with money is your money mode, I like to call it. So we're looking at, with that money access, what is the opening energy of those houses? There are 3 money modes, and you have the mutable money mode. Again, I don't love the language of those words. They don't evoke much for me. I like to relate it to relationship dynamics. And we're looking at your relationship with money in this case, but you are a mutable money mode, which makes you a polyamorous when it comes to how you make your money. The difference is we've got the lifers, we've got the serial monogamous, and we've got the polyamorous. So there are the people that are here to find their way, find the company, find the business or the project, whatever it might be, and let that be the vehicle that takes them the distance and evolve inside of it. You are not that. By the way, I'm a mutable money mode too. We are not that. There are the people that are cardinal money modes, the serial monogamous. They would get bored with that like we do, but they also don't do well juggling multiple things at once. That would scatter them, spread them thin. So they're all about committing to what they're choosing in the moment until it's clearly run its course and then closing that and moving on to the next thing. Mutable money mode people, however, like us, actually do best when we have multiple things to bounce around between. And one of the ways that that plays out is, like you were saying, you learned all this stuff about business that will get applied later. It's like we learn things in one direction that we can use in other directions. And part of the way that that plays out is that we're able to bounce between them and apply something from here to over here. I'm curious on your journey of ultimately creating 3 successful businesses and
Yeah.
absolutely doing that juggle now. I find that often people with this money mode are hard on themselves. Like in the beginning, they think that they're, have problems with commitment or
Mm,
are too scattered, like shiny object syndrome. There's all this judgment on
mm.
what ultimately is just the way we're supposed to be with the ways we make our money. I'm curious for you what that journey's been of ultimately fully embracing that having multiple plates spinning is the way that you're meant to do
Yeah.
business.
I think I've always liked the idea of having multiple streams of income. And when I looked around at the people that were the most successful, it seemed like that was the case. It was harder to find examples where it was just the one thing.
Mhm.
Like, even the people who absolutely crushed it in business, so you could argue that that's their one thing, but then when you look at what they did with their money, they would be invested in real estate and these other things, or they would have it in stocks, and so I was always I don't know, I always felt drawn to the idea of having more than one thing, and maybe part of that was safety orientation too,
Mhm.
just, like, almost having a hedge or having, like, different things that could mitigate the risk of something else, but like you said, there's also the boredom factor as well, and that definitely can be true for me. If it feels too linear and too much like, "Okay, this is the way it will be until the end of time," that isn't interesting. So I tend to be probably so far to the extreme of multiple, multiple, multiple that I'm reeling myself back in. So maybe there's a little bit of I don't even know that it's judgment, but it's just a push-pull where I have to be like, "Okay, that's maybe the big vision or the 5-year thing, but let's
Mhm.
focus a little bit." Like, what are we doing right now to build that? But I'm super into real estate right now, and
Mhm.
to me, it makes perfect sense, and it doesn't feel like a deviation at all from what I'm doing. It feels like the logical next step. If I'm helping women entrepreneurs, make more money in their businesses, well, what do I see as the biggest drawback in entrepreneurship? Okay, the way that most women who are agency owners, coaches, consultants, which is pretty much all of my clients, the way they have their business set up, the biggest drawback is that if they can't or don't want to be actively involved at some point, it's a huge problem. It's
Mhm.
a very active way of making money,
Mhm.
which is awesome. Typically, what we do is we go from an active way of making money that we don't like to an active way of making money that we do like. And so
Mhm.
that feels super freeing and awesome. But if we're not building in some buffer for life to happen,
Mhm.
then that can be problematic. And like I've seen it in my own community. Like I saw a woman who's a coach and her husband went through a quick bout with
Mhm.
cancer and
Mhm.
died, and they've got 2 young kids. And it's like, is she still supposed to show up and try and sell her coaching packages right now?
Right.
But if she doesn't, then there's no money,
Yeah.
and we can give myriad examples, but regardless, so, like, to me, real estate is this obvious next step,
Mhm.
and then I get so into the ways of doing it that are, like, tax beneficial, so you don't even have to come up with more money to do it, you're just reallocating money that would otherwise go to the
Mhm.
government and putting it into
Mhm.
passive income, and that is lighting me up and is super interesting to me and feels like it's all part of this mission, but probably to people who aren't this money mode, the lifers would be like, "Wow, okay, she's got a lot going on over there." And I guess I do, but to me, I like it that way, and it seems so obvious, and I just can't imagine it any other way.
Yeah, and so this brings in, I mentioned you had like a 4-part stellium with your son. So we talked about what was in Gemini. This is all early Gemini. So you have Venus there in Taurus, also with everything else. And that's your descendant. So your rising is Scorpio. On the other side, its opposite is Taurus. And so when it comes to, again, like how you help other people, descendant is the other side of the mirror. Venus, we're talking about both how you relate with other people in your work, but also what your codes of receiving are. So this is a big one as well, is your Venus. I like to think of it like we've probably all heard of the love languages, the 5 love languages. I think there's actually a lot more than 5, but the other way to break it down and make it more nuanced is often we have different love languages for how we receive love, ideally, and how we give love.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times those are different, right?
Yeah.
So with Venus, it's more looking at your codes for receiving love. And then, of course, love is money, right? Like the way that we open to receive more money. So for you, that is in Taurus, which the way that you were describing the value of setting up passive income streams is so Taurus.
Yeah.
All about having that secure and safe and peaceful relationship with money.
Yeah.
Where you eliminate the worry and fixating on it because you know that you've set up streams that are going to come to you regardless.
Yeah.
And so you can just relax and trust and receive. And so not surprising that for you, that is feeling like the absolute next move. You're like, well, I cleared what was in the way. Now let's actually create the structures that support a lived experience of that new reality where I'm not constantly thinking about or worrying about it because I actually don't have to. There's actual things that I've set up in place.
Yeah, 1000%. That's my money love language. Even as you were saying it, I'm like, yes, doesn't everyone love this?
Surprisingly, no. That's what's so interesting about astrology, right? There's people that have the opposite. Some people are going to have Venus in Scorpio, where what really opens them to receive is more of those big cycles and knowing that going deep and doing the work is going to open up what's possible on the other side. And then we're going to go back in like the edges of the wheel.
Yeah.
Versus Taurus is like, actually, I'd like to just chill out at the center if that's okay. And just like know that I can just be at peace and that everything is under control.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I see it even, you know, in the coaching industry with other people who talk about money, where the way that it feels to me energetically is like they're on a money roller coaster.
Right.
And I'm like, oh,
exactly.
No, thank you.
Well, and so what's interesting there, though, is you and I are both Scorpio risings. There is a place for that in our lives, which is more around our own process with our identity. Like constantly be tuning into what are we letting go? How are we transforming how we know ourselves and how we show up to the world? And so what we're magnetizing, but not when it comes to how we receive money, the example that we're being for other people. They're two opposites. It's like a yin yang, right? They work together, but
polarity. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, I have a question that is a curiosity that's come up for me around familiarizing myself with these 6 money wounds and knowing that you've worked with lots of women around them.
Yeah.
So because you're specifically working with women and empowering them in their self-employed ventures, usually shifting their relationship with money inside of the vehicle of their business that is also their vehicle for growth and transformation. I'm curious about the witch wounds and how that fits in, if that's more of an umbrella thing that you see kind of creep into all of these 6 when it comes to money, or where that's placed around your research and expertise around these wounds that women are moving through.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I've seen it specific to money. However, it certainly shows up in mastermind spaces and collaborative spaces with women. And so that's where it tends to be a little bit more in the forefront for me as a coach and a facilitator, is giving women spaces to learn to really trust each other and have each other's back. And often the women in my masterminds will end up collaborating or hiring each other for different services. And it can be so healing for us to have those relationships where it truly feels like, wow, wait, she's not secretly trying to compete with me. She actually really wants me to succeed and she wants to hire me. And like, you know, we just unfortunately haven't always had those experiences. You know, men, part of the way that they're oriented toward wealth often is through joint ventures and collaborations and networking and how can I help you and you can help me. And they tend to have a pretty clean energy around that. Whereas with women, it's like we've got a couple steps to go through before we can get there, because at first that doesn't feel safe or even possible. The craziest thing about that is our natural orientation. Like the lioness who hunts, and when she brings the food, she makes sure the whole tribe is fed.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the lion would just eat and make sure he's taken care of. And so there is this real nurturing and community orientation to women that is like kind of a biological superpower. And so I think it's this really sad thing about the witch wound. It makes it even worse than it already would be, is it's taken the thing that is our natural superpower and turned it against us. And I think there are many conspiracies around that, like that was the entire point, was to subdue the feminine power, and it worked. And now we're in an age where it all needs to come back into balance. And so in order for it to be balanced, we need the rise of the feminine energy and healing the witch wound and putting ourselves into spaces where we can really be held by other women and uplifted by other women is a really beautiful and important part of that.
I love that. And I feel like, you know, showing people the way to walk the path of healing their money wounds, Freudian slip, is like an access point to that, because the whole thing was taking the power away from women. And when each woman individually is able to recognize and move through her own stuff that's in the way of her personal power, she's then able to lean into spaces with other women that are doing the same, where, as you said, the whole thing is to become powerful together. And that is absolutely the feminine principle, is togetherness and over competition. I love that. I want to bring one more piece in here of your chart that first I want to ask you if you're even aware of. This is one that I love to bring into sessions because most people don't know this about themselves. No software or app that I'm aware of that pulls astrology charts shows you this. And in my opinion, it's the most energetically loud part of any moment. And so, of course, it had a huge part of the imprint on each of us when we took our first breath that became our birth chart. And that is the phase the moon was in. Do you know what phase you were in?
No.
The moon was in when you were born? Yeah. So, right, from day to day, like you'd have to look up an app to see what's going on astrologically in the sky, but not with the moon phase. And like, even people that don't pay attention to this stuff know the difference between what it feels like on a new moon or a full moon. Right? Like, we feel so much more energetically inward. Things are just kind of quieter during the new moon. Full moon, the werewolves are out. People are acting crazy. There's just like so much more energy and chaos.
I had my son on a full moon. And they say, I think it's like 15% more births or whatever happen on a full moon than
when the energy is moving, for sure. So it's really interesting to know what phase we were born under, because that is basically our energetic home base.
Oh, interesting.
Like what your time of the month is, to know that that's kind of your, you know, home reset before you go around the wheel again. But also just to know qualitatively and energetically, like what that part of the cycle is that feels like home to you. Because, you know, this cycle of energy waxing and waning is something that plays out all over the place.
Okay, I'm so curious now.
Right? So you were born during a waning crescent moon.
Okay.
So it was on its way back to new. It was after the last quarter, which I call the half waning. Another one where I'm like, that doesn't evoke anything for me. The moon's it's half its size. So it's after we get past that kind of tension of reflection. So we've had the full moon, you know, everything popped off. things start to settle. And then we have that moment of kind of like reconciling with our beliefs and our inner world, whatever that new information and
Yes.
those new experiences are.
Yeah.
You're right past that. Where now we're like, okay, home stretch, back to everything dissolving, back to nothingness, letting this whole cycle go and starting to feel the tendrils connect with like, ooh, what are my next intentions going to be? Like nearing that reset again. So firstly, I'm curious, just knowing that part of the cycle, has that been a time for you that historically you've noticed there's an extra like exhale that happens for you as we near the new moon each month?
It's funny because when you did the context, I was like, what phase am I going to be? And I was like, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be full moon or new moon. And then I was like, okay, is it going to be waxing or waning? Because I'm like, I really like aspects of both, like the starting new, but I also love the get shit done, like completing the things that you've already started in the waning. But I hate that part of the luteal phase, which is, also connected to the waning moon where you just like question everything. And so I was like, what is it going to be? And then when you said it's waning, but it's past that like question everything moment, like, oh, yes. Okay. That feels so good.
100%. Yeah. So for me, it's right after the full moon and same thing. Like I know that that's my place because I get that relief. I'm like, oh, thank God we're not there anymore. Just like you do for the half waning. Totally. So what that is for you is like, basically when we're at that waning crescent, we are, like you said, wrapping things up, checking things off our to-do list, feeling a sense of closure around everything that transpired during the cycle. There's also this pulling away from the world and retreating back into our inner world. So when it comes to your connection to what's beyond the veil, like this greater knowing that you have beyond time and space, your connection to the void and everything that's possible, you have a special connection to that because you were born at a time when the whole world was energetically leaning into that space. So you have like a lean into that space as part of your design.
That's so cool. I love that.
Yeah, it's cool to know when your cosmic time of the month is. It's a time when you're the most naturally grounded and resourced. So it's cool to know, like, if there are things that are feeling particularly daunting or you're like, schedule them for that time. Well, I mean, there's obviously a lot of factors because that's always an inward time. So it kind of depends. But
yeah,
it's a good time maybe to have conversations that have felt sticky because you're going to be at your most centered and grounded when it comes to the waves of the tides of the moon phases.
I love that. Yeah, and I think that naturally unfolds that way for me, where there will be things that have been kind of like on my to-do list that I haven't felt any yes energy towards, so they've just been sitting there, and then all of a sudden, when it's in that phase, it's like I'll look at that same thing that you could say I've been avoiding. I just won't do it until it feels like a yes to do. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Let me take care of that. And it's like, it's effortless and it's easy, but it wasn't until that very moment.
Yeah. So it's a cool thing to know also around like some of the more grueling work around our healing process, or like you said, anything that we might avoiding. That's a time to like circle back to those things and be like, now is it a yes now?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure getting to look at your work in the world and how you got to be where you are now through the lens of your astrology chart. And for our listeners, where can people learn more about that work and find out about those 6 money wounds and your new book and everything that you're offering right now?
Yeah. So if you go to emilywilcox.com, you can click to take the free money wounds quiz and find out which money wounds are strongest for you. There's also a link there to buy the book. The book is called Wounds to Wealth. You can also look it up on Amazon, and there's paperback, ebook, or audiobook that I self-narrated. So if you're into that, I can be in your headphones. And then find me on social media at mmakesmoney or search Emily June Wilcox and come hang out. I share a lot of free resources, including the podcast, through my social media.
Perfect. All those links will be in the show notes. And thank you so much, Emily. It was such a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you.